All right, welcome to LTC Heroes Live by Experience Care. Today, I'm really excited because I'm at the Nebraska Healthcare Convention, and I'm talking to Mark Parkinson. He's the president and CEO of AHCA. Mark, welcome to the program.
Hey, great to be here. I'm pleased to be here as well.
Mark, I know a little bit about your story, and I've listened to a lot of your interviews. What the listeners might not know is that you and I have something in common, which is Kansas.
We're both from Kansas.
So I usually start off with your long-term care initiation story, but I want to start, since we have that in common, what your journey was like from Wichita to KU to Topeka and to DC, and when did long-term care come in?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and there's kind of a political side to it, and then there's the long-term care side. So I grew up in Wichita and went to Wichita State, but couldn't stay in Wichita because I wanted to go to law school, and there was no law school in Wichita. So I ended up in Lawrence at the University of Kansas, met my wife, who was from Goddard, Kansas, which I know is your hometown, and she met her in law school. And we thought about coming back to Wichita, but we both got nice job offers in Kansas City in the Overland Park area, so we stayed up there. And we thought we'd practice law for the rest of our lives. We were happy. We had 3 kids, and it was all going well. But I was also involved in politics, and I was in the state Senate. And as part of being in the state Senate, I toured an assisted living building in the early days of assisted living, like the early 90s. They had just started. I fell in love with it. I thought it was such a great thing to take care of people in a residential setting. That, a very long story, but my wife and I decided that night that we were going to build an assisted living facility.
Wow.
We thought we'd just have one and that we'd still practice law and I'd still do politics and all that. Well, once we opened up the building, we realized this is a 24/7 occupation. We quit practicing law, and I thought I had permanently retired from politics. I ended up as governor, but that's how we ended up in long-term care. And then one thing led to another. We built 10 facilities. We raised our kids in the buildings. In 2006, Brookdale came along and bought our operation. That allowed me to get back into politics, and through a very strange set of circumstances, I ended up as governor. When that ended, I was hired to be the CEO of AHCA out in DC, and I've been out there now for 12 years.
Thanks for the refresher. And, you know, it's not common that somebody from Wichita ends up being, you know, the face and head of the most important healthcare association. I want to go back, and I'll tell you why I want to go back. I want to go back to maybe a memory that you have of working inside of a long-term care facility, and that kind of sticks with you. Maybe it's something that you tell your kids, or maybe it's something that you hold dearly. Maybe it's a certain individual, because I think humanizing our leaders is the way that we get young people to follow and work in it, because it's a mission. There's something different in here. Is there, when I ask you what memory comes to mind, maybe it was some particular resident, or maybe it was a CNA. Does anything come in like, this is what I'll tell my grandchildren?
Yeah, I mean, so many memories come because, you know, we didn't just own our facilities. For 10 years, we worked in our facilities. So one that's kind of on the humorous side, we did everything. You know, we were independent owners. So we did the landscaping. We helped out at breakfast. We took people to their rooms. We took people on outings. And one weekend, there was a family member that was visiting from out of town. And he had seen me there all weekend doing various things. And I was out planting some flowers on Sunday afternoon, and he came out and he said, can you tell me who the owner is? Because I'd like to nominate you for Employee of the Month. I've been watching you, and it seems like you're doing everything. I said, well, I'm not eligible because I am the owner.
That is a great story.
And that was actually one of the proudest moments that I had, because that was what we were all about. We were about everybody doing everything that was needed to make the place work. And then, of course, you know, the other memory that immediately went in my mind was a resident that I deeply loved that we were able to sit with as she passed on. And part of what we do is not just try to create great experiences for our residents while they're alive. We try to create a great setting for them in order to die in a peaceful and painless way. And so I have all kinds of memories, and I appreciate the question because it brought back a flood of images.
I love hearing the stories, and everyone's a little bit different, and you can, something about that question changes people's tone, and you start to think about really why we're here. The next question I have for you, Mark, is, I always call this the humble hat question, because I think that particularly leaders in this industry work, work, work. Their love language, if you've ever read that book, is often service or being present. But there's not a lot of time for acknowledgement to talk about what we've done well. What is something, maybe one thing, maybe two things that AHCA and you in particular, your leadership has done really well in the last year or two that you haven't received the positive press that you should?
Well, I'm going to point out two things, and it's really not me, it's our team. When we came into the pandemic, we knew that we were going to need a lot of workers, that we were going to lose workers, and it was become a major problem. And so our team, and it's actually Pam Truscott, who is from Nebraska, came up with an idea of developing a temporary nurse aid program where people could get trained to work in facilities with only about 8 or 12 hours of training. We put the program together under Pam's leadership. We took it to CMS. They approved it, and we put the training up on our website for free. You didn't have to be a member. We were just trying to solve a problem. Over 300,000 people have taken the training, and over 200,000 are working in buildings. I can't think of an association that's ever done something like that. And that wasn't me. That was our team. The second thing is what just happened with our payment rule. CMS proposed that we were going to receive about a 2% payment cut. We went to our members and we said, look, we've got to pull together to fight against this. We submitted 6,920 unique comments. And what I mean by that is these were not form letters that our members, these were unique letters and emails that they put together. I am confident CMS has never gotten that many emails or letters on a topic before, and we changed their mind. They went from a 2% cut to, starting this October 1, a 2.7% increase, and just a beautiful example of what can happen when we all pull together and get our message out.
That is amazing. I'm really happy that you mentioned the online aid training. It's when I interviewed Dr. David Gifford in Georgia, he said the exact same thing, and I shared that with other people afterwards without recording. They're like, I didn't even know about that, and I said that's why it needs to be brought up. So I'm glad you
I just can't think of an association that's ever had that kind of an impact on workforce before. Now we have a lot more work to be done because lack of workers is a massive problem in our sector right now.
Mark, the next question I want to ask you is the part of the week that you really, really enjoy. You know, like you're traveling to a lot of conventions, twice as many as me this year. But when you're at home, you're at your office, what's a part of the job that you most enjoy?
Well, I'm from Kansas, so we get up early in Kansas, and that is a huge advantage in DC, where everybody's constantly complaining about the traffic. Well, I leave the house usually about 6:30. I get into the office at about 7, and I really have about 2 hours where the rest of the East Coast is still not working. And it's in those 2 hours that I'm able to get caught up and get a lot of things done and really reflect. The other thing, and I know this will sound very weird, maybe this is a Kansas thing, I really like driving into work and driving back. I like the road time of, just 30 minutes kind of to myself, thinking things through, maybe listen to some music, maybe listen to sports talk, whatever, but I really enjoy that time.
Speaking of sports talk, Chiefs won yesterday.
Chiefs won big. Yeah.
How often does Mahomes get mentioned on a long-term care podcast?
Everyone that I'm on. But other than that, I'm not sure it happens very often. Mahomes, if you're a Chiefs fan out there, Mahomes has been a gift. And what's great about him is not just an incredible quarterback, which of course he is. He's a great person, and you can see that the way he leads the team, the way he communicates with people on the sidelines, the stuff he does in the community, et cetera, et cetera. So I could spend the whole time, talking about Mahomes.
And if you haven't heard of him, you should be a Chiefs fan, right?
Absolutely.
Mark, I want to ask you, I guess this topic about advocacy comes up frequently. 2 weeks ago, I was at the Missouri Convention, and 6 months ago, I went to Capitol with them for advocacy. And I was asking Sarah Hinkie there about what it's like advocating in long-term care when it's not really a partisan position. Sometimes they don't even know what we're advocating for. They don't have time to read the bills. They don't understand it. Is that an advantage for you in DC that there's not really a partisan lineup on long-term care?
In DC, because things are so partisan in DC, there's a little more of a partisan lineup than what we see in the state capitals. And each side, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, has things they want to help us on. And unfortunately, each side also has some areas where they're challenging. And so, for example, right now with straight Democratic leadership, we see an onslaught of regulations. I mean, I'm a moderate Democrat, but the Ds are quite pro-regulation. And in our sector, that's a killer. The Republicans, when they were completely in control, the first couple of years of the Trump administration, they really went after Medicaid. They tried to get rid of provider taxes, et cetera. So what we hope for and what we work for in DC is we divided leadership where everybody has a say, but nobody has complete control. That's what we think works well for us. Now, having said that, both parties want to help the elderly. Both parties want people in our buildings to get great care. They just have different philosophies in how to do it. So, just staying on the advocacy topic for a minute, the thing that we're really stressing this year and what the listeners and viewers could do that would help us the most is get members of Congress in their buildings, get their state legislators in their buildings. That all stopped during COVID, and there's such a huge turnover among public officials, particularly at the state level, that we got a whole bunch of people in these state capitals now that haven't been in nursing homes, maybe, sometimes ever. We need to get them in our buildings to see who we take care of, how much we care, and just the love and compassion that exist in our settings. So, we need to get a bunch of people in buildings.
In terms of starting to come out of the pandemic, what's the biggest thing that you are facing in DC post-pandemic regulatory issues? What are you advocating for right now?
Well, in 2020, under the Trump administration, there was a ton of federal aid that went to providers. With the Biden administration, that has dried up. And so we have had to shift our focus to the states. The states have received a bunch of federal money. So we've been working with our state execs to really try to maximize provider recovery at the state level. At the national level right now, we're mainly playing defense. We're trying to keep some of these very negative regulatory proposals from occurring. So for example, there is a potential proposal to require 4.1 hours of direct care per resident every day, whether the money is provided for that or not. And so what we're saying at the federal level is you can't do it until we can get our workers back, but then if you do it, you got to pay for it. So we're advocating to make sure that this regulatory stuff doesn't hurt us, while at the same time, we're trying to help the states so they can continue to get the Medicaid increases that they've been getting.
Are you optimistic about that message being heard?
I'm optimistic, but again, we're going to need the help of the members. Just like we got 6,920 comments on the proposed Medicare adjustment, we need thousands of emails and letters on this unfunded minimum staffing rule. We're going to be rolling out a plan around our convention, which is in early October, for providers to help us with this. If we all pull together, I think we can have the same kind of success that we had with the payment rule.
Mark, as we start to wrap up, I'm going to ask you to comment and give some advice on 4 different segments of people. The first one I'm going to ask you is, if you have a 15-year-old, let's say a neighbor who sees you go to work every single day, and he comes home from school and he sees you coming home and he goes, Mark, what do you do? I hear you work in healthcare, work in long-term care. Tell me why I should consider working in long-term care. What would you tell that young 15-year-old?
Well, the nice thing is when you work in our buildings, even though it's really hard, you know that 100% of what you've done every day is helping people. Back when Stacey and I were practicing law, we would come home sometimes at night really wondering, what are we doing with our lives? Sometimes we were on the right side of a case, but sometimes we weren't. When we worked in our buildings, even on the hard days, maybe especially on the hard days, we came home and we knew that every minute of every hour of every day was spent trying to improve people's lives. And there's just very few occupations where you can spend all your time just trying to help people.
When you mentioned that story, it reminds me of a beautiful interview I did with a gentleman in Leading Age, Georgia. And I asked him why he got into long-term care. And he said, I was a manager of a retail store, and there was so much snow one day. My kids' class was canceled. My work was canceled. And I was on the top of the hill watching my kids go down sleds. And I said, nobody misses me at work today. I need to do something different. It reminds me of what you just said there.
Yeah. Well, trust me, they miss you when you work in the buildings. I remember shortly after we'd opened up our first building, we took the family on a vacation, and which is not easy to do when you're in a building. And one of the residents that I developed a very close relationship with said, where have you been for the last, few days? I said, well, we went on a vacation. She said, you could never go on a vacation again. Don't leave. So trust me, the people develop a relationship, and you are missed when you're not there, for sure.
All right, Mark, next piece of advice. 25-year-old CNA, single mom, she's burnt out. What could you tell her about why she should stay in long-term care?
Yeah, I mean, that's really a tough one because the CNAs work incredibly hard, oftentimes without a lot of pay. If they are good, I think what I would encourage them to do is advance their training. It's perfectly okay it's a great calling to be a CNA for your whole career, but if you're getting burned out, maybe that's an indication that you need to consider becoming an LPN, or maybe you need to consider some track where you can become an RN. And I know an awful lot of providers out there provide scholarship assistance for CNAs that want to do that kind of thing. But the other reality is that it's, this work isn't for everybody. And, if you're burnt out because you just can't handle taking care of people, maybe it's time to get out of the profession.
I think that you've kind of already, the next question is, what would you say to an owner or operator, maybe small mom and pop shop? I think you've touched on it in different moments, saying send in your comments, but anything else you'd like to add?
We just had our independent owner council meeting last week, and about 30 independent owners from across the country that came together and shared how they're doing, where they're struggling, where they're doing well. My advice to an independent owner would be to interact with other independent owners. I know, because Stacy and I felt this way at times. You can feel like you're alone and no one is facing what you're facing. Make a point to interact either through your state association or the national association with the other independent owners. Create those connections. I think it's very helpful.
And for the average U.S. citizen who's not interested in long-term care, what can we say to them to let them know that this industry is important and we're suffering and we need support?
Yeah, I mean, the facts speak for themselves. So if we can just get people to look at the facts, which is a heck of a lot of people need our services. We're underpaid for those services. We don't have enough workers right now. And we need a whole generation of people to step up and both help us on the financial side, but also work in our buildings.
Mark, my last question, and you probably see a lot of billboards on your drive into DC, so I think you might have a good answer. If you could own one giant billboard on the outside of DC that hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people would see in any given month, what would you put on that billboard and why?
Well, it would definitely be something about long-term care. And I think if somebody could artistically figure out how to convey that the real heroes in our society aren't sports figures or people that can sing, it's a CNA that's willing to work an 11 to 7 a.m. shift and for $15 an hour in difficult circumstances. So if we could somehow have that person up on the billboard as the real hero, it would be something like that.
Mark, thank you for joining LTC Heroes. It was a pleasure. Hopefully I'll run into you in another state convention. Thank you for all your support, and go Chiefs.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
Want to connect with leaders in long-term care? Go to www.ltcheroes.com to join our community on Facebook and LinkedIn. Get exclusive access to marketing tips, SOPs, and insights from prominent voices in the industry. Only at